The Media Project. Evolve Rutland is an organization created by Far Vision founders Kiki McShane, Chris Fucci, and William Kelly to focus on prioritizing, developing, and celebrating women leaders in our community.
We believe that when women take leadership roles in communities, start and sustain businesses, and sit on professional boards of directors, the economy improves and communities change for the better. We advocate for fair treatment across the gender spectrum in all business scenarios, including equal compensation, family and medical leave, and equal opportunity for advancement.
Evolve Rutland is continuously working to expand its footprint in the Rutland, Vermont region in order to advocate for, connect, and teach women and non-binary leaders, otherwise referred to as ACT. The funding for Evolve Rutland services has been through private investment of supporters in the community. Join the movement by making your tax-deductible donation and learn more on how you can get involved at farvisionconsulting.com/evolve-rutland.
Hey, good evening, everybody. This is Scott M. Graves, and you are listening to another SMG's Are We Here Yet podcast. Here tonight to talk about emerging technologies in the great state of Vermont, of which I am a relatively new resident. My guest tonight is Ryan Munn. He is an emerging technologist and Vermont resident, and he's here to talk with us about why he's so jazzed about technologies and what technologies, and how the Vermont landscape and its people can lead in emerging technologies. Ryan, thanks for coming.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here. So just for a little bit of background, you come to us from just east of Rutland, Vermont, I think, right?
Yeah, White River Junction.
White River Junction area. Those of you who may be familiar, and if you're not, this will be interesting just as well. White River Junction completely transforming their downtown and rapidly doing so.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's looking pretty nice down there. They fill in the shops. There's some new buildings that have gone up. It looks like a little downtown, and it gets busy too. Now parking is in question.
Yeah, parking is in question, and which is, they did it the right way. They created a parking problem as opposed to saying we can't redevelop because we don't have a 1,000-car garage, man.
Well, I won't pretend that things don't go around in circles sometimes as they figure out what to do next. But it's definitely going forward.
And like so many parts of not just Vermont, but all of the Northeast, housing is the problem. We need more housing, and if it had more housing, you'd have more downtown.
I think so. Yeah.
So here we are to talk about emerging technologies and stuff. Give us a little bit of background. What are some of the hot areas, specifically for Vermont, that tie, what is exciting about emerging technologies and the fertile ground that we may have here for certain emerging technologies to gain a foothold and flourish?
Well, I think Vermont has set itself as a leader for B Corps and emerging ways of doing business, and that has cultivated emerging software and hardware developers and technologists in Vermont and around the especially in some of the economic centers of Vermont. But, you can find them all over the place. Machine shops popped up on a mountainside somewhere that people are building parts for airplanes. It's pretty interesting what you can find in the scope. And a lot of people don't realize that Vermont is also a leader in some, key areas historically. We certainly have a lot of cows, but we've also led in captive insurance for over 20 years.
I did not know that.
Yeah, we're the number 2. We kind of started the wave, and we're number 2 in the world behind Bermuda for domiciling captive insurance companies.
Wow, and that's a lucrative business. I mean, I was in insurance for about 30 seconds of my career.
Oh yeah,
large scale commercial PNC, and it's a lucrative place to be.
Absolutely. It creates a nice little niche environment for certain kinds of attorneys and for businesses to, be in some cases doing really good things for wellness for their employees, and ultimately, in some ways, padding the profits. But there's some really interesting ways that concept can be used to target multiple bottom lines.
Yeah. I just mentioned the housing crunch, which is particularly acute here in Vermont. But we also know that something that can help with that is things like emerging materials, new technologies and materials. Equally beneficial to us, where some of the raw ingredients for those materials could come from, coupled with better designs for our physical spaces that we build. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, I think that there's a lot of experimental, homes in Vermont. I think there's geodesic domes here and there. But I think what's really exciting about a lot of the emerging 3D printing technology when it comes to building scale 3D printing is that you build it with the materials you have available where you are. And so, we have this unique place in Vermont where we have rural environments, we have an appreciation for the environment, and we want to create housing that cares for both humans and the environment. And so, I think those things can converge here and create a place of leadership in terms of thinking about how do we use the materials we have and how do we design in ways that are going to be, very good for the environment, both in terms of natural and the social environment that we have with people living there.
And if we talk about the actual materials of the housing itself, right? We were talking off air a little bit about our mutual backgrounds in residential development and in materials. The idea of custom modular design, the idea of using materials. Some people want to build houses out of freight containers and stuff. Others, we know, using similar materials, but custom building each one of the homes to meet the needs of the person living there and the socioeconomics of the family. But that, the biggest obstacle to a lot of these designs is that, this is New England, right? So people still want that salt box or that colonial and stuff. And so I think, I wonder if you have any ideas about just the idea that some of the innovation has to come in the way we present the idea to people, because we need more widespread adoption of, frankly, just domiciles and commercial buildings that are just better designed to be not only energy efficient, but in a lot of ways they're better for people. But you've got to get over the cultural inertia, right? That places people in their mind in a certain place that, well, this is the way it's always been,
It's like that initial dissidence, right? It's the first time somebody sees something new and unfamiliar, it seems or feels uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the exciting things. We're at a place now too where technology can help us bridge that gap more rapidly, as people get the opportunity to engage in, virtual experiences, to think about what a new space might look like, to think about, looking at even an old home and, what could we do with these bones, if you will, to rethink how this home presents and how this home serves its inhabitants. That's really exciting.
What do you think about the idea, also as part of the design, the opportunities in design that become more innovative, just the idea that we create density again? Doesn't seem to be a lot of popularity for that, right? People are still kind of stuck on, I want a suburban home on acreage. But we really, I feel, in a mountainous state, don't we run out of land really fast if we continue to build that?
Absolutely.
And it's out of step with the character of Vermont, the traditional Vermont.
It is. I mean, it always felt, gosh, I was, 19 with a landscaping job. That was the first time, stretches of grass just started to bug me. They just seem so wasteful, right? Yeah. And so I think that, again, it's, people have to see it and feel it. And I think there's some examples around the world that you can start to find where people can kind of wrap their head around a different way of living or building. But we do have some people and places in Vermont that are eager to try new things. And I think that's where we can break ground and show people how this can work and bring life together.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but there's actually public policy now in place that sort of steering people in the direction of creating density. I think there's a program for town villages encouraging village development, density within a smaller area, a central area, particularly for towns that don't have a downtown per se.
Is that the TIF? I think you're referring to the TIF districts.
TIF district, that's definitely one tool as part of that.
Yeah. And then, I mean, I think that's, it can be exciting. I like the sort of concept, I guess, I've batted around with folks of micro urbanization. You know, we don't want to turn our, Vermont villages into cities, but we do want to create not just some density, but we want to create a pedestrian ecosystem. You know, we want to create a village that's inviting for people to come and be in, not just drive through. And I think that can be appealing to people. And I think that, again, if we can break ground in a few places, then, very quickly the sort of word will get out. I think the story will tell itself when people realize that they could live in a more urban setting where they actually get more amenities, but not necessarily be in a box, be in a home that feels a little bit more like part of a community, but still like it's taking care of you.
So you were talking earlier about emerging technologies and materials. What are some of the big hits in your estimation?
Well, I mean, I think pulling, biomass production is a big thing that we are talking about, and I think we can focus on in Vermont and elsewhere to help just make a stronger, more resilient ecosystem. And with that comes all the sources of carbon that you can grab carbon from and be building things with carbon-based materials or carbon-based composites, and then breaking that down even further into graphene and some of the graphene materials, even electronics. The sheer engineering possibilities of graphene opens up quite a wide range of possibilities, both in building materials and in just attracting a mind share of people interested in working in a particular area of expertise.
So for those who are not as hip to what we're talking about, how do we get to graphene, right, from our biomass? Most people may. I don't want to. I don't want to pretend like everybody knows. So biomass, define these things.
Well, I'll try to break it down a little bit. So most people have heard that we're all carbon-based life forms, right? And so we eat carbon, we profuse carbon in various ways, and we're pretty much made of it. And most of the things around us are made of carbon, but carbon dioxide is also what's contaminating our atmosphere. And so there's lots of carbon extraction processes developing to capture those carbon emissions, but also the things that we do, like how we handle animals and allow them to graze as opposed to cramming them all into a building. Those things, as they graze around and leave things behind, contribute to biomass production, which is securing carbon in our soil. Right. And so all these different ways, natural ways and capture ways to stop that carbon from going into our atmosphere. Some of them can produce masses of carbon that we then need to do something with. Well, conveniently, carbon is the building blocks of life and everything. And so one of the things that we could be doing with carbon is building materials, structural materials with that, infusing that carbon into cements and other types of, wood-based materials that would be something we'd build with. And when we start talking graphene, that's just the fancy term for a more highly engineered form of carbon that gets down to structuring the carbon at the atomic level.
Right. So you've taken something like cow manure, other manures, human biosolids. That's just, a polite way of saying human poop.
Yeah.
And we either through pyrolysis or some other type of process, sometimes we break the stuff down in anaerobic digestion. But the point is you get it down to an inert elemental level as a solid, usually in some form of aggregate that you can then put into other things. And then I've always thought this is really fascinating just because it's extremely inert. And if you want a carbon sink, you want to take massive amounts of carbon and put it somewhere where it's locked in there for 1,000 years, make concrete with it.
Right.
Make all of your building materials with it.
Well,
and it's a huge marketplace for getting rid of this stuff, you know?
you can make a skyscraper with it, or you could make a microchip with it. They've also discovered that lining up the carbon atoms into a tube creates what's the term, superfluid electron states.
Oh, right.
Right.
I know
So-
very little about that, but
Yeah.
I've read about it and it sounds cool.
But yeah,
It's as much as I'll say.
yeah,
I'm not going to pretend to understand it.
Yeah, I try to understand it, but the one of the explanations that I really liked that was kind of cool was that essentially think of it like if you're trying to make microchips, one of the ways you might be doing it with graphene is a sheet of 1 atom thick graphene, so 1 atom thick of carbon, and then doing origami with it.
Neat.
And then that ends up creating all these fold patterns that the electrons.
Speaking
travel
of
through.
density, now we're talking about atomic density,
Right?
right? Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
But you can, that material is very versatile. There's a lot of things you can do with it. One of the challenging things is that some of the technologies aren't actually that far from the reaches of the common people, too. Carbon's everywhere, whereas lithium is very limited, or silicon, very limited.
The Hub co-works. This is your community. This is The Hub. Special membership discount now through March 31st. Find out more at rutlandvermont.com/the-hub-coworks. This is your community. This is The Hub.
Like we're talking about rare earths all the time, and that they're a primary material in every battery that we need. And I just keep hearing rare earth.
Right.
This sounds like we're going to run out of this at some point in time, right?
Right, right.
Or just the fact, even when we think about, speaking of materials, we think about the fact that the world's, phosphorus is a very finite resource. We're down to the last gasps of phosphorus on the planet. This is essential for our chemical fertilization. Not that chemical fertilization really should continue. It's actually not good for the land. It's not good for us. But but it's still the predominant way we mass produce agricultural product.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like 2 countries left that have the lion's share of the phosphorus in the world.
Right.
And so it would only take, political problems between, say, the United States and Morocco, or United States and China, to basically stop any access to phosphorus for the time being.
And yet the
Not resilient.
the environmental problem that we have in our lake, known as the blue-green algae blooms.
Yeah.
is
Now we're talking
caused-
specifically Vermont problem here. The Lake
Yeah.
Champlain issue.
Caused-
Other lakes have had it too in the summertime. Blue-green algae.
caused by an excess of phosphorus,
Yeah.
which is coming out of mostly dairy farms. Not to say there's anything wrong with dairy farms.
Is it dairy farms, or is it people in their lawns? Because it seems
Well,
like
that too. That
50 years
certainly
ago
makes
there
it-
weren't this many lawns being fertilized.
No, that's a big contribution too. Yeah, fertilizing lawns so what's interesting about that though, right, is we have this shortage of phosphorus, and yet we're flushing it off of land over and over again.
Right.
And yet there's also natural systems that store phosphorus.
Yeah.
Right.
And we're not taking advantage
And
of
we're
it.
not taking advantage of them. So there's all these things that, we have to learn to find those additional bottom lines and take that bigger view. But it's pretty exciting what could be done. Ironically, one of the natural candidates for storing phosphorus is the glow in the dark fungus that you can find around in the woods, which is a
Yeah.
really fun way to store phosphorus. And the other is the psilocybin mushrooms, which
Yeah.
are apparently also a very fun way to store phosphorus. But, that could be then captured in banks where runoff, whether from some type of farm or from the local yards, runs through these series of banks, getting absorbed and processed in a natural way.
Then isn't the challenge then really a philosophical one, or this is an intellectual exercise. It has to take shape first. We have to think differently about. So much of what we do is the equivalent of walking through the jungle with a machete versus walking through the jungle and, carefully moving, leaves and stuff out of your way.
Yeah.
Like, we're still almost in a very 17th and 18th, 19th century way, an extractive economy, literally pulling from the earth whatever we can to make something with, as opposed to getting a lot more strategic about the way we think of things, which is, it's a number of different things. It's, recycling everything we've already been using so it's more circular, but it's also about maybe rethinking what we would put into a product or service in the first place. And then, of course, the financial models that go into this too. You've struck upon a number of all of these things at least once.
Yeah. It's funny. I feel like a lot of it is a symptom of our financial models, because our financial models, and you even called it out, it's kind of like we're a few hundred years old. We're still at that same place we were a few hundred years ago, and it's this short cycle. It's this somehow this naturally human conflation between the annual cycle and our economic systems.
Yeah. Or even down to the quarter now.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Stakeholders want to know, where's my profit?
Yeah. And yet, if we actually dial back, we can see, even since we've been tracking financial markets every 10 years, there's these much bigger cycles at play.
Yeah.
And that's, I think the challenge that we're facing is, it's hard for us to just break and throw out the old systems of thinking about finances and economics, but how do we create new frameworks to look at those systems and create sort of different versions of that end result?
Yeah. One thing I want to touch upon related to everything we've talked about so far today is, it seems to me that virtually every emerging technology which could be extremely relevant to a new economy in the state of Vermont could also be done largely with very little employment. So I think this gets back to, and I'm wondering if you just have any specific thoughts on that. It seems to me this gets right back to the point you just made about financial models, long-term thinking, and making choices more globally, so that, and I wouldn't say it's, putting people over profit. It's more like kind of redefining what profitability means. That maybe profitability for a small group of people versus a wider group of people, but it's just as profitable, is it's just a different way of thinking that would inform how we educate people from day one. You know what I mean? So that we change the culture and the attitude around that.
Yeah.
Have you given any thought to that?
A lot. There, I think there's a little bit of that chicken and the egg, question in terms of, what the answer is. It's this evolution of learning, financial education that people have to overall, just like we want folks to think outside the box in terms of what, urbanization might look like and what residence looks like. Think about what money is and what economics represents is something that people will take time to change. But I think that there are with technology that we have today currently operating, it is really possible for people to, be self-sovereign, to be, in control of their assets, to have the ability to leverage assets and negotiate across borders and boundaries. Not everybody's empowered with that capability.
And I was just going to say that it's all possible,
right?
But we haven't figured that out yet, because we've sort of transposed this extractive economy on the internet and on all digital technology. I mean, one of the predominant, if not the predominant, financial model is data mining. It's some kind of data mining,
right?
To get more eyes and ears focused on being marketed to, and the combination of the two, that ceaseless marketing coupled with you're taking my private information and selling it to somebody.
Simplicity. We crave simplicity, right? And so at a certain point, the financial model said eyeballs equals dollars. So, all right, we don't have to think about dollars. We'll just go after eyeballs and the dollars will come. And they weren't wrong. But the challenge that we're facing right now is realizing that there was a significant payment for those eyeballs, right? and we see that in mental health. We see
For
that in the challenges across the country with violence and substance abuse. It is that is the trade-off for tricking people into thinking that interaction has value when it doesn't.
Yeah.
And they spend all that time interacting in a way that then doesn't actually give them value.
It's an intellectual Snickers bar.
Yeah.
It leaves people entirely unfulfilled. In fact, in tracking media for the last 30 or 40 years, I feel like it's in many ways the pinnacle, sort of the apex of ceaseless and also meaningless media, as opposed to being a lot choosier about the media we produce, how we produce it, how we present it to people, who gains access. We're reaping what we've sown. The good news is it's all been formed, right? This is all on purpose.
Right.
So we can stop
did
it.
So we can do something else.
We can do something else. We kind of know what we need to do. We're just not doing it.
And I appreciate it for the fact that, I have an 11 and 14-year-old, almost 15, and I'm pretty confident that we're talking about all the things we need to, that I'm not worried about them becoming a degenerate gambler, right? Because we're already dealing with the conversation about impulse control and influence of things and people and all that stuff.
I think I have a 12 and 15-year-old. I think they're far better prepared, assuming that they've come through. It sounds like for the two of us, you and I, our children are coming from, really stable households.
Right. I cry for the kids that technology is raising.
That's what I'm saying. So we're really kind of creating two classes of people. But generally speaking, I find the younger folks coming through our incubator here, many of them are just like, you guys looking at me, the Gen Xer, you and your boomers.
Yeah.
You messed up the internet for us.
Yeah.
You hear me, Sporty?
Right.
So and they're off of it, but they've got this much healthier relationship to it.
Yeah.
And I go, get yourself off of that and start building some real relationships. You hit it right in the money, I think, a moment ago when you said, it's unfulfilling. It's not giving us what everyone thought it was going to give us. It's not. The interconnectedness is still possible.
Right.
It's just the way that we've done this so far, it's created the opposite.
Yeah, it's rewarding the interaction with the thing instead of rewarding the interaction with the people.
Yeah, you have experience running business incubators. You had
a little
mentioned
bit
before, a little bit, right?
Co-work space.
Co-working space, okay. But you've been around this culture, let's say, for a while now. Do you think that maybe, is it to say that perhaps the most valuable thing we can bring to the table is a change in that culture? The way I would express it in our own wheelhouse here in Rutland at Startup is putting technology in the right context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think...
And I don't mean just digital technology when I say that. I mean all technologies, like understanding the difference between
like
a technological solution. Well, yeah. Democracy is a technology. Human relationship, here's another way to put it. Human relationship taking priority. Mm-hmm. That whatever the technology is designed to serve mankind, not the other way around. I feel like a lot of it's out of context for most people.
Well, it's usually there in the pitch, right? When the founders are trying to raise money for it.
Yeah.
that's where it is, and then it gets lost somewhere along the way. I think that's what's really interesting is that there's a lot of good intention out there, but we do have some, I think, brokenness in our capital systems. I kind of joke is like, I believe in capitalism, but I believe in a corporeal capitalism, right? Capitalism based on individual people competing amongst each other to be better, not just to be better than somebody else, but to compete, to maybe be ranked in some way, or to compete with yourself and to be better.
Oh, I like that idea.
Kaizen, right?
Yeah.
That's the capitalism that I believe in. But corporate capitalism shifts that interest of being better to this soulless, immortal legal entity with its only legal binding is to make a profit.
You know what I hate about it the most? There's a lot to hate about it.
Yeah.
But what I hate about it the most is the insistence upon its most successful arbiters that just give us a little bit more time.
Mm-hmm.
It's all going to work itself out. It's working itself out now. It's giving us the best life that is possible. Right. And I look and I there's something very distasteful. I'm being very polite about it. And it's ignoring, it's like we've been living at least two parallel realities for 200 years. It's ignoring John Stuart Mill. It's ignoring John Stuart Mill's father. It's ignoring the Count de Condorcet. It's ignoring employee ownership. It's ignoring 200 years of, we're not saying capitalism's bad, but ultimately it's ignoring Adam Smith, isn't it? Yeah, Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations was really 3 books, physical books, 3 volumes of the same book. Okay. And the first book is the one that particularly American corporatists always quote. It's free market.
Gotcha.
The other 2 were like, I'll give you the short synopsis. We're saying capitalism's great. It's probably the best system we have to date. I know, of course, it was predicting a lot of capitalism. Capitalism hadn't happened yet in 1775 the way we know it now. Mm-hmm. But it was saying, but there is, because of human nature, because of certain market forces, when they're unleashed, we need to create a balance. And here's the reasons why. And here's some suggestions, I think, in the future over the next 100 years, how we can make sure that it's capitalism, but it's capitalism for the maximum number of people who wish to participate.
Yes.
Those are the parts of The Wealth of Nations nobody likes to quote, it seems.
Right. Yeah.
In the United States.
I don't think I've ever heard that one at all.
I didn't get this in grade school. Let's just put it that way. I had to search for this. But it's like, that makes sense.
Right.
Getting back to what you said earlier, we have the tools.
Absolutely.
We just aren't using all of them, right?
Yep.
We have the concepts. We just, we have to make that shift.
Yeah. I mean, there's been plenty of research that shows that, there's value to organization among people, right? I mean, that's where this concept of the corporation comes from the word cooperation. Mm-hmm. But it was somewhere, in the 1800s, I could get more specific, but I won't dive into that subject. But the, corporation became this, immortal profit-seeking entity where, it had the ability to sort of argue on its own behalf as a person almost in a court of law.
Well, according to our Supreme Court, they are equal to a person.
Right. And that's the scary thing. But the other thing that's interesting about it is that it is in our power, right? I mean, if everybody just said, well, I'll only go work for an employee-owned business. Now, granted, maybe they couldn't pull it off today, but if people were really starting to think that way, and that's what the surveys were showing, and that's what companies are looking at, because I don't know if people have noticed, but companies are hurting for employees these days.
Right. It's hard to hire people.
We have power. It's not just the vote. It's not just where you spend your money. It's where you show up and put in your work and effort every day. Yeah. We have power in choosing who we work for, who we make money for.
Yeah, I love it.
That's a realization.
Democracy. That's democracy at work. And the intersection of democracy and capitalism, how it could work.
Absolutely.
I love your vision, Ryan Munn.
Thank you.
One last thing before you go, in relation to bring this back locally, right? Yeah. White River Junction. Just again, like we said in the beginning, it's turning into a great place. Lots of great, interesting places downtown. The expansion of housing, but that footprint. There's challenges to actually building out from that footprint. We were talking about that earlier off air. What's some of the more interesting things that you think can be done there when we think about urban planning and innovation?
I think collective ownership is key. I think coming up with ways to engage more people into collective ownership, especially around residential properties, but also being more thoughtful and creative with how we design residential mixed-use spaces so that we can have more pedestrian economies. I'm really excited about what technology can do. I will drop that, I spent time in the State House pushing some legislation around personal information protection and blockchain-based LLCs, because there's a lot of capability for technology to streamline the organization and operation of the interests of a group.
Yeah.
And if we can start to engage in that here in Vermont, I think we could be a leader in the world, thought leadership in those types of entities and movements. But I also think we have a severe need for housing right now. And if we get enough heads together and some, forward-thinking ideas in front of them, I think that we can actually make that happen and get the density that we want to have a good housing market, but also have really interesting creative architecture that serves the people and the environment and the economy.
I love it. Ryan Munn is our guest this go around. Ryan, it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
You too, Scott. Thank you very much.
SMG's Are We Here Yet podcast is a production of M the Media Project and SM Graves Associates. Learn more at smgravesassociates.com.